Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker, and on this Friday evening, I'm joined by Bastani. Aaron, how are you doing?
Michael, I'm very well, thank you. I've had a nice day. I can't lie. Just walked the dog, but I'm very happy to be joining you for a regular Friday session.
Well, I'm very pleased that you're joining in good spirits. We've got loads of stories today for you. 5 in total. Labour could introduce the right to a 4-day week. Kinda. There are some qualifications that we'll get into. And I speak to author Anastasia Berg about falling birth rates. Really interesting conversation. Much more as well. Stay tuned for all of that. First, though, let's take a look at Kamala Harris's first major interview. It took Kamala Harris over a month to give her first sit-down interview after becoming the presumptive Democratic nominee. And that meant there was a lot of pressure on her first interview. It was given last night to CNN. And on the first softball question, she didn't seem super prepared.
If you are elected, what would you do on day one in the White House?
Well, there are a number of things. I will tell you, first and foremost, one of my highest priorities is to do what we can to support and strengthen the middle class. When I look at the aspirations, the goals, the ambitions of the American people, I think that people are ready for a new way forward, in a way that generations of Americans have been fueled by hope and by optimism. I think, sadly, in the last decade, we have had in the former president someone who has really been pushing an agenda and in an environment that is about diminishing the character and the strength of who we are as Americans, really dividing our nation. And I think people are ready to turn the page on that.
So that was not a gotcha question. What's the first thing you would do if you enter the White House as president? Of course, she's always there. She's already there as vice president, but as president, then you get this sort of minute-long word salad. People want hope. I would push things forward. Name something. When pushed, Harris did name one concrete policy, that's extending child tax credits. She also mentioned ambitions such as bringing down costs on housing and essential goods. But sort of if you're waiting 40 days to give an interview, when you're given that first really easy question, what would you do on day one? You probably should have had something a bit more concrete. Harris did have some decent moments, especially when defending her and Biden's record over the past 4 years.
I maintain that when we do the work of bringing down prescription medication for the American people, including capping the cost of the annual cost of prescription medication for seniors at $2,000, when we do what we did in the first year of being in office to extend the child tax credit so that we cut child poverty in America by over 50%, when we do what we have done to invest in the American people and bringing manufacturing back to the United States so that we created over 800,000 new manufacturing jobs, bringing business back to America, what we have done to improve the supply chain so we're not relying on foreign governments to supply American families with their basic needs, I'll say that that's good work. There's more to do, but that's good work.
That wasn't a word salad. I thought that was quite persuasive. I'm sure people can sort of question how many manufacturing jobs Biden did bring back. Of course, there was a COVID pandemic, so some of it was probably sort of natural bounce back, but it was definitely a sort of convincing answer, I thought. Harris's biggest weakness as a candidate, a bit like our own Keir Starmer, is that over the years she has switched positions on a number of policies. In 2019, she said she supported banning fracking. Now she's changed her mind. She wants fracking. In 2020, she said she would decriminalize irregular migration. She's now changed her mind on that. She now sounds much tougher on the border. On the issue of flip-flopping, the vice president said this.
The most important and most significant aspect of my policy perspective and decisions is my values have not changed. You mentioned the Green New Deal. I have always believed, and I have worked on it, that the climate crisis is real, that it is an urgent matter to which we should apply metrics that include holding ourselves to deadlines around time. We did that with the Inflation Reduction Act. We have set goals for the United States of America and by extension the globe around when we should meet certain standards for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, as an example. That value has not changed. My value around what we need to do to secure our border, that value has not changed. I spent 2 terms as the Attorney General of California prosecuting transnational criminal organizations, violations of American laws regarding the illegal passage of guns, drugs, and human beings across our border. My values have not changed.
I thought she was going to say regarding the passage of time there, but she sort of was talking about a different topic. Loads and loads, actually, of parallels with Keir Starmer, right? So loads of flip-flopping when it comes to positions as a politician, and then much happier to talk about her previous career as a prosecutor. And of course, in America, being a prosecutor, a bit more politicized in the sense that they do have elections for them. But nonetheless, she's sort of saying, I prosecuted these people. Don't pay too much attention to what I said 4 years ago. Exactly the line that Keir Starmer had ahead of our general election. So maybe that's a good sign for the Democrats. There was one moment, though, in the interview, this is the last clip we're going to show you of it, which I think is probably the most disappointing to progressives. This is Dana Bush asking Harris about her approach to Israel's war on Gaza.
Would you do anything differently? For example, would you withhold some U.S. weapons shipments to Israel? That's what a lot of people on the progressive left want you to do.
Let me be very clear. I'm unequivocal and unwavering in my commitment to Israel's defense and its ability to defend itself. And that's not going to change. But let's take a step back. October 7, 1,200 people were massacred. Many young people who were simply attending a music festival. Women were horribly raped. As I said then, I say today, Israel has a right to defend itself. We would. And how it does so matters. Far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. And we have got to get a deal done. We were in Doha. Mm-hmm. We have to get a deal done. This war must end.
In the meantime,
and we must get a deal that is about getting the hostages out. I've met with the families of the American hostages. Let's get the hostages out. Let's get the ceasefire done.
But no change in policy in terms of arms and so forth.
No, we have to get a deal done.
I say that's the definition of madness, sort of expecting a different result after doing the same thing over and over and over again. We have to work really hard to get a ceasefire deal. You're going to change any of your policies? Oh, no. Just maybe I'll be more charming than Joe Biden. That doesn't add up whatsoever. Aaron, I suppose there's about a 50% chance. The election is 50-50, a 50% chance that Kamala Harris will be the next president of the United States, the most powerful person in the world. Obviously, China now has an economy which is sort of at a similar size. But if you add America's military into it, clearly that is the most powerful job one can hold. Did we learn anything from that interview?
Not especially. Kamala Harris is operating on vibes. There's not much of substance. She's clearly far more coherent and more likely to win than Joe Biden. There were some of those words like transnational. I was thinking, how would Biden pronounce transnational? He couldn't finish a sentence. She can do that. Great. Even at moments, she seems lucid. Obviously, she's repeating pre-formulated talking points, but nonetheless, that's a skill. That matters. Biden literally was proving incapable of doing that in this electoral cycle. So she's a massive upgrade on Biden. Right now, she's polling ahead of Trump in lots of states which are going to matter, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and so on. But right now, what's really interesting to me is that you have Michigan. I think 2% of Michigan's population is American Arab. Gaza is a huge issue there. If this election is lost on Michigan, then I think Democrats, and it might be, it's not likely because there are so many states in play. Obviously, there's 50 states in play, but realistically, there's about half a dozen states in play in this particular election. But if the Democrats lose this because of Michigan and Trump wins because of Michigan, then I think people will look at those comments, particularly relating to Gaza and Kamala Harris's offer, really, to voters who care deeply about Gaza, who are very unhappy with Israel. And I think they'll look back on that as critical. I mean, if that's not the case, if Trump wins with more electoral votes than just Michigan, it don't matter. And of course, Kamala Harris could win substantially too. So many states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, margin of error between these two characters. So who knows? But Gaza absolutely does matter in a number of those states, like I say, particularly Michigan.
Labour have pledged to be a government on the side of renters, but one of their new MPs doesn't appear to be. Jaz Afol is Labour's MP for Ilford South, and at the last election he replaced left-winger Sam Tarry, who was deselected. Afwal, who had been leader of Redbridge Council for a decade, is also a prominent landlord. He owns 15 rental properties, more than any other MP, and according to a new report from the BBC, the condition of those properties is not good. Their online report is headlined, "Ants Are Everywhere. Labour MP's tenants reveal condition of flats." The BBC found that in one block of 7 flats owned by Mr. Afval, nearly half the tenants said they had to regularly clean their bathroom ceilings to remove mould. And the BBC also saw evidence of ant infestations in a number of the 7 properties. The story is really quite shocking. The ants are everywhere, one resident said, pointing to insects climbing up a doorframe. They are on my kid's body and on their clothes. Another resident said they had been threatened with eviction by the letting agent if they complained about problems in their flat or started claiming benefits. Mr. Afwal said the properties were managed by an agency. He had not been aware of these problems and denied any tenant had been threatened with eviction. He said he did not take on tenants on housing benefit to avoid conflicts of interest with his role as the local council leader. He described himself as a renters champion. Now we'll get on, to the condition of these houses in one moment. Something that's just sort of jumped out at me here. He won't accept tenants, and this is a regular thing, by the way, that private landlords do. They say, I won't accept people on housing benefits because they think that if you're on housing benefits, you're more likely to get into arrears if you get, if your circumstances changed. And he said the reason he is not accepting people on benefits isn't the same reason that all these other private landlords do it, which is that, they want to protect their income and they're willing to discriminate against poorer families to ensure that will happen. He said he doesn't want a conflict of interest. Now, councils don't decide who does and doesn't get housing benefit. That's a central government issue. I would have thought being a private landlord is actually where the conflict of interest comes in, right? Local councils do regulate private landlords. They don't distribute housing benefit. So it's very, very confusing indeed. When Joe Pike from the BBC visited some of these rental properties, it certainly didn't seem like Mr. Afwal was a renter's champion. So Joe Pike writes this: "When I visited the properties which are above an empty shop in Ilford, the communal areas were dirty and the lights did not work. Fire alarms were hanging loose from the ceiling and a washing machine had been dumped next to a set of stairs. One resident showed me black mould growing on their bathroom ceiling, adding that a family member is a clean freak who keeps scrubbing the area with bleach to keep the mould at bay. Another said they had Googled black mould and realised it could be toxic. The whole ceiling would be black if we didn't clean it every few weeks, they said. I knocked on every door and spoke to most of the tenants. None wanted their name to be used. Some specifically said this was due to a fear of being evicted." So these people are fearing being evicted. Now, I suppose I have to say that would probably be the case in most places. If you've got a journalist knocking on your door, you're a private tenant, and they're saying, tell us about your landlord. That's the condition of a private renter. You're always scared that you're going to be kicked out. So that's not necessarily exceptional just from that description. However, Joe Pike, so the BBC journalist, did write about potential intimidation faced by people renting Afwal's properties. So he writes, "While I was at the block, the property manager was tipped off about my visit and tenants started to get calls from him. After receiving these calls, they became hesitant about talking to me. This appeared to me to be intimidation. One resident who had spoken on camera about problems with their flat later asked that we not use the interview, and another asked me not to use images of the mould, 2 days after allowing me to take pictures of it." So the journalist went round, took pictures of the mould, to put in a BBC report. The letting agent or the property manager calls up, suddenly, no, please don't use that. Because obviously, even if they've changed their name, a letting agent would be able to sort of match, I suppose, the patterns of the mould on the ceiling. Quite grim in and of itself. Aaron, this is really quite an astonishing story, isn't it? This is a new Labour MP, an MP who actually, can we call it controversial? I mean, they deselected an MP to do it. It would have been controversial when Corbyn was leader, right? So they deselected an MP to get this guy in. He's the House of Commons' most prolific landlord. And even while that, it's not, when you hear of reports from residents said there were ants, right? You think in your head, okay, that's terrible. But maybe it was sort of, even in my house, which is not in the worst nick, on Flying Ants Day, we always get ants that come into the bathroom. It's annoying, right? So you think maybe it's like that. But no, there were ants on the day that the BBC journalists entered, which suggests they're probably there all the time, right? Ant infestations, mold. This is a Labour MP. What's your response?
Yeah, it's just extraordinary. I want to go back to one of the graphics you just read a moment ago, Michael. Fire alarms hanging loose from the ceiling. I mean, what does the FBU make of that? That's an affiliated trade union to the Labour Party, the Fire Brigades Union. What do they make of that? How would they feel about any landlord, let alone a Labour MP, profiting from a building like that? Did the fire alarms work? And a washing machine that had been dumped next to a set of stairs. You've already talked at length about the black mold. The whole ceiling would be black if we didn't clean it every few weeks. This is just extraordinary. Communal areas dirty, lights not working. I mean, this is the 101 of properties. Then Jaz Atwell has replied saying, I'm a good landlord. Maybe we're going to hear more about that. I don't know. I'm a good landlord. It's below market rates. Well, guess what, Jaz? In properties where people live with black mold and ants and fly tipping next to the communal areas and lights not working and fire alarms hanging from the ceiling, in properties like that where they pay below market rates, we call people like you a slum landlord. That's what we call you. I mean, I love this kind of this window dressing he's trying to put around it. It's in shit condition. It's awful, but they pay below market rates. Is that how people, administering slums 100 years ago would have defended themselves, legitimated what they're trying to do? Absolutely extraordinary. He has 15 properties in terms of private housing rental and then 3 commercial properties. 18 properties as a Labour MP, and as a Labour MP who replaced a previous Labour MP who was ditched by the local party. He claims he was stitched up, Sam Terry. And of course, he was given the boot from the shadow cabinet because he went on a picket line. I think in microcosm, this explains what's gone wrong with the Labour Party and the kinds of people now representing the Labour Party. And by the way, you could have had Keir Starmer's project, his project, and you could have had people like Sam Terry in it. The point is the Labour right didn't want to play that game. So instead, we get these parasites, frankly. A few things. Firstly, I shared this story a while back before the BBC report, when it was merely highlighted that Jaz Atwell had the 18 properties, 15 private rental properties for housing. And I called him a slum landlord. And then, of course, I was quote tweeted by a councillor, a Labour councillor who knows Mr. Atwell, and he said it was personal and nasty. Well, if disliking slum landlords is nasty, take me away. And he went on to say that Jaz Atwell was a lovely man, a lovely councillor, a leader in terms of providing good housing for people. This, again, is a microcosm of the Labour right. The truth is whatever they say. They have zero capacity for self-reflection, partly because of their relationship to the Tories and the Labour left, right? The Labour left, they're all crazy. We have to keep them out. Everything we do against them is right. And of course, the Tories are the definition of evil. Therefore, we as the Labour right can do no wrong because the baddies are these two guys. And what it means is that you get people like Jaz Atwell getting a free pass. And I'll finish with this. I find it utterly remarkable that there are young people in London who will rent for the rest of their lives and who will be giving money hand over fist to people like Mr. Atwell, who are benefiting from their lives being more shit. There are people, young people like that, campaigning for people like Mr. Atwell. It's utterly extraordinary. It's not turkeys voting for Christmas. It's turkeys saving up their money for the Christmas dinner, driving the family to Lidl, and paying for all the dressings and the Christmas crackers. It defies belief. And like I say, anybody who's going to be renting, probably for the rest of their life, if they want to stay in London as a young person, what on earth are you doing campaigning for somebody like Jaz Atwell?
Let's go to his comment. So Mr. Atwell declined to be interviewed by the BBC, but gave them this statement. I pride myself on being a good landlord, and no tenants have ever been evicted. Repairs and improvements have been made to properties as recently as 2 weeks ago to ensure tenants enjoy a secure long-term home. Rents are kept below market rate, and in many cases, rents are frozen at the rate first agreed. Now, sort of as Aaron has said, sort of saying you're charging below market rates isn't really a defense if your properties are infested with insects and have, dangerous black mold on the ceiling. So it's not particularly convincing. Also, I saw, when Aaron was tweeting about this, sort of someone responding, it's the tenant's problem if there's mold. Now, this is just so ridiculous. Aaron, actually, you responded in a very intelligent way. Instead of me paraphrasing your response, how did you respond to that person saying the mold is the tenant's fault?
So yeah, I responded biographically. I said, look, I've lived in rental properties between the age of 0. Neither of my parents owned a property when I was a kid. From 0 to 35. In the majority of them, I think there was damp of some kind, mold, all kinds of horrors, nasty smells. I'm an asthmatic. I would often wheeze as a result, particularly if I was sick, if I had a chest infection or ill. Being in a property like that made it significantly worse. And what I said to him was, well, you know what? The minute we bought a property, we spent a couple of grand, there was some damp here, it disappeared. And I don't think people who rent or come out of renting their entire lives, maybe some social housing too, don't know this. But some of these problems that landlords and letting agencies, they let them string out for years and years and years. Often they'll fix them by just doing some bodger bill job. Actually, some of these problems can be fixed, Michael, for a couple of £1,000s. I find it utterly extraordinary. Often like single glazing, or maybe there's some cracks around the window. You might need to re-render a wall. You might need to use some kind of damp treatment or ventilate a wall a little bit better. A couple of £1,000s. But no, they have to let, the 10 or 15 people that inhabit that property over 20 years or whatever it is, they have to not be able to breathe properly. They have to live with a stink and a stench. They have to have the black mold because you can't spend a couple of £1,000s. Jazz Atwell said he didn't know what was going on. There was a letting agent that was managing these properties. Well, you were taking the money, sunshine. You were happy for the profits to be going into your bank account. You're happy for the increase in the value of these properties and the increase in equity, right? So they've got increased resale value if you want to sell them on in a couple of years after making money from renting them out. So don't give me all this crap about, I didn't know, I wasn't managing them. Well, you were managing your bank balance. You were profiting from them. You were profiting from people in properties where they've got smoke alarms hanging from the ceiling, where lights don't work, where there's fly tipping, where there's ants, where there's black mold. You should be ashamed. You should be ashamed. Frankly, he should not be an MP of any kind, let alone a Labour MP. The fact he's not ashamed, the fact that there isn't a mass sense of shame amongst Labour MPs, Labour activists, Labour campaigners, some of whom are defending him, I think is really instructive. People like him are the problem. People like him are the problem in this country.
You've put that very well, Aaron. I'm moving out of my flat this weekend after living there for 4 years. And I'm really hoping that the next one doesn't have mold. The current one does, of course. I think it seems to me that the majority of private rental properties in London must have. The majority of private rental properties I've lived in London do have mold. My housemate, actually, the landlord came round a couple of years ago or a year ago or so, and he said, look, I've got all this damp. We have these weird built-in wardrobes that are sort of on the external wall, just a normal size wardrobe that's built into it. And they get incredibly moldy inside, so you can't actually keep any clothes in there. And my housemate asked the landlord, can you get me a dehumidifier? And the landlord said, no, that would be an admission that there's a mold problem. Right? So he specifically wouldn't try to fix the problem, because if he were to try to fix the problem, that would mean that he was therefore liable. I mean, I don't know if that legally stacks up, but that was the answer that was given to him. And as it stands at the moment, it's with tenancies being as insecure as they currently are, it is difficult to try and take that legal recourse against your landlord, because they can, pretty much kick you out at any point. Hopefully the Renters Reform Bill will do something about that. Although with people like Jazz Atwell on the Labour benches, there are some reasons to be concerned. Under new plans drawn up by Labour, full-time employees could get the right to work a 4-day week at full pay. Now, that sounds great. There is a catch, though. You'd still have to work the same number of hours, right? So it'd just be squished in 4 days instead of spread over 5. Now, this is set to be part of a new workers' rights bill that should give workers some more power in the workplace. The Daily Telegraph says currently, employees have the legal right to request flexible working, but there is no obligation on companies to agree. That balance of power is to be shifted, with companies instead legally obliged to offer flexible working from day one, except where it is not reasonably feasible. It means workers will have much greater powers to get bosses to agree if they want to complete their full week's hours between Monday and Thursday, taking Friday off. So sort of in general, they're saying the workers' rights bill is going to shift the burden of proof onto the employer if they want to, say no to a request for flexible working. They'd have to explain why. They're not going to be able to give that. And lots more people should, if they want, be able to get a 4-day week. To discuss Labour's plans, I'm joined by Director of the 4-Day Week campaign, Joe Ryle. Joe, I mean, a 4-day week sounds good. A 4-day week where you have to do, all the hours of your 5th day, but over those 4 days doesn't sound quite as good. It sounds potentially even more stressful than spreading them over 5 days.
Yeah, I mean, well, exactly. I mean, we have broadly welcomed this move from the government, just because, we do feel like it is in recognition of how popular kind of 4-day week has become over the last couple of years, and in recognition that, this is probably where we're headed for the future. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, compressing 5 very long working days, let's say a 40-hour week or even a 44-hour week in some cases, into 4 days rather than 5, is also going to bring problems. It's not the kind of dream work-life balance that we're looking for. At the same time, it does normalize kind of Friday not being a working day. And, we do think is a kind of, in some ways, an important first step on the road to a true 4-day working week. But yeah, it's absolutely, as a kind of 4-day week campaign, we advocate for reducing working hours and that being the kind of number one priority.
I suppose talk us through what your campaign is demanding. So you think that people should get a 4-day week, which isn't, and the 5th day, it's not just that you won't be working a 5th day, it's that you won't have to do those hours and you keep the same salary. I suppose the obvious question to put to you, how does that work for the businesses, for the firms, right? Because it's not a complete surprise that Labour is going for their version of a 4-day week instead of yours.
Yeah, so we advocate for a 4-day, 32-hour working week or less with no loss of pay for workers. That's the model in which kind of hundreds and hundreds of companies across the UK now have adopted. And, not just in the UK, there's governments all across the world looking at this now and trials being run. What we've found is when companies do that, it seems to be a win-win for both the worker and the employer, because we've seen productivity improving on the kind of employer side. Workers are better rested, they tend to work more efficiently, more effectively. But then we've also seen all the kind of well-being metrics massively shoot up. So people are much happier, have a much better work-life balance, generally living much more like the good life, That's where we want to get to. But we do recognize, that's not going to happen overnight. Maybe it's going to take a decade. It's 100 years since we moved from a 6-day week to a 5-day week. So it's going to take some time to get there. But yeah, we're broadly positive the government have done this, but it's not, compressed hours is not the solution.
Let's talk about some of these companies that are adopting it. I know sort of your organisation has been involved in trials. Some companies sort of found that it does work. They've kept it. Others haven't. Can you sort of fill us in? What were the sort of lessons from the trials that you've helped to run?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the vast majority of companies, so we ran the biggest ever trial in the world so far in 2022. I think of the 61 companies that took part, it was about 91% went on to stick with it, kind of continue with it at the end of that trial. So virtually all of them kind of continued with it. And we're finding all sorts of benefits, not just to the kind of worker side, but they were job recruitment, job retention improved, profits had even gone up, for many of the businesses. And this wasn't just, kind of like, say, a marketing company in East London. It was companies all across the economy. We had manufacturing, we had a fish and chip shop, a brewery, retail, hospitality, loads of different industries represented. And they were all trying to find efficiencies and trying to find ways of implementing this kind of reduced hours 4-day working week. And they did it very successfully. And I think there's also another point on this, which is that, if we think about automation or artificial intelligence, which is already coming into the workplace, these technologies all make the workplace more productive. And so workers have to benefit from that. And they won't do unless they get a shorter working week. It will just be more profits for company bosses.
Now, I can see how, like an office job, it might be the case that you get as much work done in 4 days as you would have done in 5 days because you're a bit more alert. You spend less time just staring at the screen or playing solitaire or whatever because you're a bit more motivated. There are other jobs where it's difficult to see how you'd get such a huge productivity gain. So say hospitality, where the key thing you are is there to serve a customer. It's difficult to see how you can serve as many customers in 4 days as 5 days. So I suppose is there going to be... You presumably can't get pubs, say, to voluntarily pay people for a 5-day week when they're only working 4 days, and the government would have to intervene in some way. I mean, how would that work?
And it's going to look quite different in different industries. I mean, take the hospitality industry. That's an industry that would massively benefit from a 4-day week because everyone would have much more leisure time on a Friday. Same with kind of retail as well. But on a more serious note, it's going to look, implementation is going to look quite different in each sector. It's not going to be a kind of 4-day week overnight for everyone. It may be that in some cases a shorter working week on the way to the 4-day week. But in all industries, this kind of 9 to 5, 5-day working week model is very outdated. It's 100 years old that we moved to the 9 to 5, 5-day working week with a weekend. And actually, we found even in all sorts of different sectors, there are ways of improving productivity. There are efficiencies to be found. And frankly, let's be honest, in most industries across the country, people aren't doing much work by Friday afternoon anyway. And this is just about mandating that leisure time so that we all live a better life and then we come back into the workplace and pass on those benefits.
Or in a pub, Friday afternoon is presumably when they start getting busiest. But I'm with you. I mean, I'm very much in favour of a 4-day week, probably especially for people that work in the hospitality sector because it's incredibly stressful, more stressful than my job. Joe Ryle, thank you so much for speaking to me this evening. The world's falling birth rate is a hot button issue at the moment. That's in part because birth rates are falling much faster than experts had predicted. So new figures released this year show that in 2022, the US birth rate fell to a record low, and Britain also just clocked its lowest fertility levels, which are now at 1.49 per woman. Across the political spectrum, people are now noting the problem. So in a recent piece in The Observer, Sonia Soda warned the falling birth rate threatens a disaster so costly no politician dares think about it. She said a demographic time bomb caused by an aging, shrinking population is looming for many Western countries. So where are the policies to defuse it? In the piece, Soda highlighted research showing that in 23 countries, including Spain, South Korea and Japan, populations are set to halve by 2100. And of course, they won't just be smaller populations, but also much older populations with all the fiscal problems that inevitably brings. However, the prominence of child rearing as a political issue isn't just thanks to a hard-headed social scientific look at demographic trends. It's also because in the United States, one presidential ticket has made it an issue in a rather grotesque way. In July this year, J.D. Vance was forced to defend comments he made in 2021 about the Democratic Party being dominated by what he called childless cat ladies. And earlier this week, J.D. Vance refused to roll back on those statements.
I regret certainly that a lot of people took it the wrong way, and I certainly regret that the DNC and Kamala Harris lied about it.
But do you regret what you said, Senator?
Look, Kristen, I'm going to say things from time to time that people disagree with. I'm a real person. I'm going to make jokes. I'm going to say things sarcastically. And I think that what's important is that we focus on the policy. There are certainly going to be things that I say. If I'm elected vice president, people are going to say, well, I wish he had said that differently. I think it's most important to actually be the person I actually am and to say, those sarcastic comments were made in the service of a real substantive point. This country has become too anti-family. It's too expensive to afford a house. It's too expensive to afford groceries. Donald Trump and I want to change that. And unless we get better leadership, we're not going to.
But again, just very quickly, given that people have told you directly, have spoken out, have said that they were offended, they were hurt by those comments, do you wish you never made those childless cat lady comments?
I think that it's much more important for me to just be a normal human being who sometimes says things that people disagree with. I have a lot of regrets, Kristen, but making a joke 3 years ago is not at the top 10 of the list.
I think if you have to say, I'm being a normal human being, it's sort of one doth protest too much, I think. It was a tough line of questioning faced by J.D. Vance there on NBC. But former Fox News host Megyn Kelly gave Vance an easier ride.
There was a long piece, June 10th, 2024, in the New York Times, and another one in the New Yorker, highlighting a book that's called What Are Children For? On Ambivalence and Choice, in which the authors, leftists, liberals, got deep into this very problem and chastised their own side for the reluctance to have children and the messaging to young women about priorities. It's not just a Republican thing. The honest liberals will admit themselves that somehow the Democrats are running away from family as one of their previous old core values. I'll just give you a couple of excerpts from the New York Times piece by these two authors, Anastasia Berg and Rachel Wiseman. Again, this is a month ago. They write, for progressives, waiting to have children has become a kind of ethical imperative. They go on to say, the The success narratives of modern liberal life leave little room for having a family. They say this is not just a recipe for unhappiness. It also reflects a deep confusion. And they go on to write as follows. The question of children ultimately transcends politics. In deciding whether to have them, we confront a philosophical challenge. Is life, however imperfect and however challenging, however fraught with political disagreement and disaster, worth living?
That was Megyn Kelly, a very right-wing host. And the book she was referring to there was this. So it's called What Are Children For? On Ambivalence and Choice. It's by two philosophers, Anastasia Berg and Rachel Wiseman. And earlier today, I spoke to Anastasia Berg, and I began by asking her how she felt about getting an approving name check from Megyn Kelly.
I must say I'm ambivalent. I'm apprehensive because I think the way she characterizes our position is not quite right. I'm not so much worried about declining birth rates as such. What I'm worried about is the kind of increased ambivalence that's pointing to uncertainty, confusion, and the dominance of the kinds of cultural and social scripts that I think are making the decision to have children that much harder for individuals to make. Whether or not you have a child, what you answer to the question, yes or no, that's not the concern that we're targeting. But we do think that we can help people make a more clear-eyed and freer choice with regard to this question. But I have to admit that I'm also excited about seeing somebody who's conservative, who's coming from the religious conservative right, raise this issue and recognize that there is, I think, actual potential, what we would call bipartisan cooperative potential here. We can find in the embrace of a human future through the having of children something that we can work with the right on to promote policies like free universal healthcare that we do not have in the US, adequate parental leave, or free childcare.
I suppose I want to dig into sort of what you see as the root of the problem and what motivated your book, because what we hear often when it comes to sort of this question of birth rates is people saying, you know, a few years down the line or a few decades down the line, we're going to have a lot of old people and we're not going to have many working age adults, and that's going to create fiscal problems. Who's going to look after the old people? So it's very much a sort of economy, social policy debate. You're coming from this question from a different angle. I mean, is it that you think that sort of indecision about having children could lead people to have less fulfilling lives? I mean, where are you coming from here?
Where I'm coming from is from the recognition that for people of my cohort, so millennials and Gen Zers, we are facing many kind of normative expectations and scripts of how people should lead their lives, what success means personally, professionally, and romantically. What does it mean to be a responsible, ethical, liberal, or progressive, whether or not vis-a-vis questions of how having children fits into a woman's life or how we can justify having children in the face of climate change? And across all these domains, we see pressure to either postpone having children or treat the question of children with suspicion and even a kind of antipathy. And so it's not just the fact that we are confused or ambivalent, and that may be unpleasant, or that the decision is difficult. It should be a difficult decision. It's a huge question of tremendous, both personal and ethical significance. But what bothers me is that I think we're in the grip of bad arguments that make us think that as responsible individuals, we are meant to treat children with suspicion, and that in choosing to have children, we are engaging in one choice among many, a kind of consumer choice that we may be permitted to make, but not one that we can actually ethically justify or even celebrate as something that is good. And I think what's missed here, in addition to what you allude to, which is a kind of possibility of dissatisfaction as we postpone this decision more and more and end up having it made for us, I think we're also missing something of tremendous, I would say, ethical, philosophical significance, which is that having children and securing a human future, that's the condition for everything else that we as, say, political actors would care about, be it climate change or political reform.
The response to JD Vance has been very negative, I think, especially from women. Now, I think that's understandable. That's because they think that this is going back to a politics where women's sort of child rearing decisions are sort of the business of the state. Obviously, this comes in tandem with some really sort of horrific movements when it comes to making it very difficult to get an abortion in the United States. So I think that the suspicion of JD Vance is completely warranted. You do, though, think that sort of this is a debate that left-wing people need to be having. That's sort of why you've made this intervention with this book. And I suppose it sounds to me like you say it's not so much, JD Vance is saying we should pressure women to have children. You seem to think that we're almost pressuring them not to have kids, or sort of encouraging people to be very, very negative about family life. Am I on the right track there?
I think you are. I think we're doing several things at one and the same time. I think that on the one hand, we're promoting a kind of success script whereby having children, or I would say even starting to think about having children, is the kind of thing that we're meant to do only when we've ticked off a long list of to-dos, achieving personal satisfaction, fulfillment, and kind of psychological stability after going on journeys of self-explorations in our 20s and early 30s. We're meant to not date with a view to having a family for a very long time and then spend very long time in our dating lives, postponing the milestones of a relationship as long as possible in order to guarantee that the relationship is stable and secure. And finally, we're meant to achieve financial and professional security and stability again. And in fact, what we've discovered in talking to hundreds of millennials and Gen Zers is that young people today are holding themselves up to standards of success so murky and so high that an individual may never feel that they've confidently reached them. And as they postpone this decision more and more, it's only becoming more threatening on them, more threatening to take away the identities and practices that they have built in their lives. So one thing that's happening is that we're just encouraged to postpone and postpone. We tell one another, you don't have to worry about it yet. Like that's a relief kind of formula. And then on the other hand, we're also treating the conversation about children and certainly any kind of talk about collectively how we want to be thinking about population growth with tremendous suspicion for, as you're saying, completely understandable reasons. But it's also important to notice that, especially in the American context, where, as you say, we have increased threats to women's reproductive rights, to let the rights agenda alienate us from the question of children, alienate us from the possibility of determining the shape of our own lives, is only to give the right another way of influencing our reproductive choices more than they already are seeking. And so that's why I think that this is something that we should not cede to the right. The left, in a personal and collective capacity, should make room for these conversations, making it possible and encouraging people to think about these things early. We teach sex ed in our schools, helping people think about how not to get pregnant, but we don't equally spend time helping people think about when is it that they should be starting to think about having kids? When should they be starting to date with a view to having children so they seriously want to have them? We should make room in our public conversation for the role of children in human life. And we should also, I think, really change what we take as the intersubjective script. So even women who are dating very left-leaning men will say they're afraid to raise the question of children in conversation. And that's something that I think our left feminist ally men can really help with, making people feel comfortable to raise it, to think about it together, and also feel like it's their problem too, not waiting till their female partners are getting sort of stressed in these so-called panic years and run out of time.
This is something we have been talking about on Novara for a while. Aaron's done an interview on Downstream with Paul Morland, who sort of has these very much sort of economic explanations for what's going on. You are coming from a much more sort of cultural explanation perspective. I was talking to my partner about this yesterday, though, and he did say, the most obvious thing is housing, right? If people are living in shared accommodation till much later. I mean, I'm 34. I'm only now about to move in with my partner. I've been living with a bunch of people my same age. More and more people living with their parents. In fact, is it not sort of? It's not a key thing here that to raise a family you need a house, and it's very, very difficult to get a house these days, either a secure rental property or owning.
I think we need to separate a couple of things here. I do think it's very important to allow young people to live in comfort and dignity. But insofar as it being the driver for the rising ambivalence about having children, here I think we have some reasons to be doubtful of this form of explanation. It is the kind of thing that we found looms very large in the minds of Americans and people here in Britain. But when we look at countries who have removed every kind of possible material obstacle, immediate material obstacle to having children, so we're thinking about the Nordic countries or South Korea, places where we have affordable housing, affordable education, free universal health care, subsidies for having children. And we see that those places are showing the same kind of low birth rates. And moreover, the same kind of ambivalence, the same kind of sense that this question is becoming more and more fraught, difficult to navigate. And as I was saying before, that one is engaged in something that's very ethically hard to figure out. That remains true in those places as well. And so, as much as I think that these policies are important, I would actually reverse the sort of causal explanation here to say that I think it's really important that we be able to embrace, and when I say we, I mean people on the left, so liberals and progressives embrace sort of full-heartedly the possibility of a human future, the importance of allowing people to have children, the goodness of having children, in order to then justify the kind of policies that will enable them to do that, as I was saying, in relative ease and dignity. But as a direct explanation, it's hard to make that stick. I will also say, though, that I would like to challenge one thing that you said about how it's obvious that in order to have a family, we should all be living in sort of separate little units. I think many people think that the reason why it's so hard to have children today, or one of the drivers, is the fact that we no longer live in intergenerational homes, or that although actually a lot of us do, it's not normative. It's not the normal thing to do. It's not what's expected. It looks like, even in the kind of little prompt that you were giving, sounds like a kind of failure, like something that we're doing because we can't make it on our own. But really, living together, whether or not with people of our own cohort or with people of a previous generation, could be something that would really help people raise children, not something that would necessarily interfere with it.
That was the co-author of What Are Children For? Anastasia Berg, speaking to me earlier today. I do also, if you're interested in this topic, recommend Aaron's Downstream with Paul Morland, which is an absolutely fascinating hour and 50-minute listen. Labour's plans to ban smoking in pub gardens is stupid and overbearing. But one MP demonstrated their outrage in a manner even more divorced from reality. Former Minister for Common Sense, that's actually what they did call her, Esther McVey, tweeted this on Thursday. First, they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. Pertinent words, restart smoking ban is what she says at the end. now following a backlash, Esther McVey doubled down again. So she hasn't deleted this. Sometimes you've got to respect someone for sticking by their guns, but it is a really stupid tweet because I suppose it's there. This is how Esther McVey responded. It was a screenshot of a notes post on Twitter. Nobody is suggesting that banning smoking outside pubs can be equated with what happened to the Jews at the hands of the Nazis. It's a really fantastic first sentence in any apology. Something to aspire to there. It is ridiculous for anyone to even suggest that that was what I was doing. Well, you did do the Nominee poem and said this is related to that, so you can see what happened. It is called an analogy, she said. Those who restrict freedom start with easy targets, then expand their reach. She's still comparing people smoking in pub gardens to communists and Jews in Nazi Germany. I'm pretty sure everyone understands the point I was making and knows that no offence was ever intended and that no equivalence was being suggested. This new socialist government should send shudders down everyone's spine, imposing laws it has no mandate for, whether removing money from pensioners, removing freedoms from individuals, presiding over a two-tier system of policing and justice. This is all over the place, this apology. I will not be bullied into removing a tweet by people who are deliberately twisting the meaning of my words and finding offence when they know none was intended. We already have too much of that politically correct bullying designed to silence any free speech they don't like. If they think I can be bullied in that way, then they have picked the wrong target. Someone has to make a stand against the metropolitan politically correct bullies. It is not my tweet people should be outraged about, but Starmer lying to get into power and then taking people for fools. Aaron, we'll talk about Keir Starmer's sort of smoking policy in a moment, which I think we probably both agree is pretty ridiculous. Let's start, though, on the Esther McVey tweet. Well, the people who were offended by her tweet, I mean, I saw more people ridiculing it, to be honest, than being offended. But were they wrong to think that she was comparing people smoking outside pub gardens to the victims of the Holocaust?
Well, she says it's an analogy, but for an analogy to work, you have to view something as broadly comparable. I mean, otherwise it's not an analogy, and that's the whole point of an analogy. We have to remember, of course, that in 2023, in Rishi Sunak's reshuffle, Esther McVey was made a minister without portfolio, but it was briefed to the newspapers that she would be the minister for common sense. She would be leading Rishi's anti-woke agenda, and top of the list was banning civil servants wearing pride lanyards. I mean, this is the caliber of people we're talking about in the Tory party right now, Michael. One of my great regrets from the last general election is that she managed to keep her seat just. I think her majority is less than 1,200. Look, we need to flush out as many people like this when it comes to British politics as humanly possible. We talked about Jazz Atwell a few minutes ago, a slum landlord, Labour MP. He should not be an MP. Esther McVey should not be an MP for a very different reason. She's completely talentless. She has absolutely nothing to offer. As I've said so many times, we are only given 650 legislators in this country. They should be good. Okay, the caliber on show from all of them, really, frankly. There's a handful who are actually highly impressive. Highly impressive. There's many more that are quite impressive, wantonly impressive. If you agree with them, you might be impressed. If you don't, you won't. But there are many. I haven't the slightest idea what the hell they're doing there. Esther McVey is one of them. I mean, you'd honestly be better off just the first person you see on the street or in the pub and saying, look, you're going to be an MP for a constituency. They will be better than Esther McVey. By the way, that's something I really believe. If you randomly chose 650 individuals and you made them MPs, and then they had to form parties and alliances over a period of time, I genuinely believe they would do a better job than the House of Commons. And I know people are going to get upset with me if that's not anti-politics, left populism. It's called sortition. It used to be the base of Athenian democracy. I mean, I'm saying that it would be superior with women involved and no slave class. I do genuinely believe it would give us better MPs than the caliber we have right now. And that's particularly true on the Tory side. I mean, it's really, really extraordinary how stupid many of these people are. We saw Jacob Rees-Mogg being briefed as a potential, he wanted to be the Chancellor under Liz Truss. We would have had a nuclear submarine docking at Liverpool. Is that even possible? I don't think so. I'm plugging it in, just like an iMac with a USB-C to show how good nuclear power is. I have no idea. And apparently this was going to win votes. So yeah, it really underscores how awful our political system is. And as much as we talk about the problems besetting Keir Starmer right now, look, after 8 weeks, he looks very remote, dislikable. Partly, of course, that's the result of him winning a general election, forming a government, and then having recess. Partly, it's they've had no sort of strategic communications efforts after winning. They've pissed off lots of different interest groups very quickly. I don't really know what they stand for. I don't know what their brand is. They won 33.5% in the general election. They should be on a permanent campaign footing, frankly. They can't lean into the authority of office when they've only won 1 in 5 eligible voters, which is what happened in the July general election. For all of that, for all of the problems of the Labour Party, you would still bet if there was a general election tomorrow, they would get the same majority because the Conservative Party are in such a mess. They are in such a mess. The quality of the people on those benches is so low. And there's not that many of them. They've got their fewest number of MPs in modern history. Well, since the existence of the Conservative Party, the modern Tory party. So they're in big trouble. And I think this kind of comment, I mean, we can laugh at it and mock it, and we'll post a clip and it'll do well. And people go, stupid Esther McVey. But it really underscores a deeper problem for British conservatism, both at the intellectual, ideological level. What kinds of people these days want to become Conservative MPs? But also a very short to medium term problem, which is the calibre of people they have right now on the benches in the House of Commons is not very high. And if you're going to try and make a comeback ahead of the next general election, you're not really giving yourself many top people in terms of leadership, in terms of shadow cabinet, in terms of trying to change the political conversation in this country ahead of 2028, 2029. It's a very, very, very low level of personnel when it comes to the Conservatives. And by the way, the one person who rubs their hands together at that is Nigel Farage.
And I mean, on the policy in question, it's a weird one because I'm very much against it. I think sort of stopping people smoking outside pubs is just incredibly authoritarian. I mean, there would be more damaging authoritarian policies, but I think it's very unnecessary. The smoking ban inside pubs was, I think, a good thing because secondary smoke does matter. If you're outside, you're really not affecting anyone else. Also, smoking areas at clubs are a really good place to meet people. I think if you get rid of that, I mean, I don't smoke, but I have a cigarette outside a club because it's a good excuse to talk to people. I think getting rid of that would be stupid. At the same time, Aaron, this is one of those policies where the public do kind of like it. I haven't seen anyone on Twitter defend it. People from the left and from the right seem to think this is stupid. I agree. The public seem to like this ban if it were to go ahead. And I suppose it does potentially say something a little bit depressing about our politics, which is the government, and this seems to be Keir Starmer's line as well, so don't expect too much from the government. We've got no money, we can't really do anything, we can't really build anything, we're not going to make your life much better, but we will ban stuff if it's popular with presumably the older generations. What do you make of it? Are you depressed by this story this week about banning smoking outside pubs? Or as a new father, maybe you've become tougher on cigarettes than you used to be?
No, I mean, I'm known as a sort of resident. I'm Nigel Farage of Novara Media, Michael. You and me are the right wing of Novara Media, whatever that means. I think this is a stupid policy. With any policy, you have to have trade-offs, and the original smoking ban had trade-offs. Those were big health upsides for people like me. I'm an asthmatic. I used to work in bars when I was 18 before the smoking ban, Michael. Can you believe it? My first job was in a nightclub. Smoke everywhere. Me giving out all the free drinks to all my mates whilst having an asthma attack. There were trade-offs, right? But I think now we've gone past that point here. So with regards to outside smoke, the trade-offs don't. We were curtailing people's liberty for a really, really good reason, right? Public health. And I don't see those trade-offs here. In terms of the polling, what you're saying in terms of popularity, I mean, it's not quite true. 50% support it. Maybe you've seen a different data. 50% support it, 35% don't. If you take away don't knows, but 50% is, it's not a majority, right? And I would suspect that the people that really oppose it feel much more strongly than the people that support it. And I think if there was a case made that this would actually have big impacts for pubs and whatnot, I mean, I presume it would. If you'd like to smoke with a drink, you'd rather do it at home, I imagine, if it's banned. So as a civil libertarian, I have a problem with it. I supported the smoking ban, like I say, because of you do the cost benefit. I don't think that's the case here. And by the way, that policy, that smoking ban is very successful. If you look at the rates of people smoking, it's nosedived, and there's a very clear direction of travel. We're already having a ban with regards to people below a certain age never being able to buy a cigarette. So I honestly think this is about the government trying to be seen to be doing something. And I think that rarely that rarely makes for particularly good policy. There are lots of things I'd like to see banned. I hate people watching TikToks and Instagrams and playing music on the quiet carriage in a train out loud, right? I hate it anywhere. But to go onto the quiet carriage of the train and be playing your phone, that should be banned. I care more about that than somebody having a cigarette in a pub garden. I genuinely care more about that. There are lots of things I'd love to see banned. And I think that given the initial smoking ban, given the trade-offs and given the sacrifices that smokers had to make, I think, like I say, legitimate, justifiable. It strikes me as quite unfair. I have many friends who smoke, and I'll go outside with them when we have a pint, and that's just something they do. And it seems almost like cruel and vindictive. And I'm not saying that as somebody who's a non-smoker, pick me, I'm on your side. I genuinely take civil liberties seriously. I'd like to see the decriminalization of drugs. It'd be very strange for me to be pro the decriminalization of cannabis, but also pro this smoking ban. I don't think the trade-offs make sense.
Yeah, I think you're probably right about sort of the people who are in favor of this don't feel very strongly about it, and maybe the people who are against it do feel strongly about it. So maybe they will sort of do a U-turn. Let's wrap up there. Aaron, thank you so much for joining me this evening. It's been a blast.
It's been a blast. My pleasure, Michael. I hope everybody enjoys the last weekend of August. Autumn's coming.
Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend. As Aaron says, the last weekend of August. I suppose you don't normally have a weekend this late in August, but there we go. Have a great time. We'll see you on Monday. You've been watching Novara Media. Good night.